Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tales from the Backlog, a video games deep dive podcast. I am your host, Dave Jackson, he, him.
I'm Gen Moonen, they, them.
And I'm Doug Lief, he, him.
And today we're going to be talking about comedy in video games. We're not talking about one game, we're talking about many games and the ways that they are and sometimes are not funny. But first, if this is your first time here, I appreciate you stopping by. If you like the show, please consider supporting in any way that you can, up to and including monetarily on Patreon. Patreon.com/RealDaveJackson is the place. But also, you can tell a friend, share in Discord servers. If you're on the podcast apps, leave a rating or a review if they allow that. And if you're here on YouTube, likes, comments, subscribing to the channel, those are all very helpful. So, as you heard at the top of the show, I've got two great, very funny guests with me here today, so I'd like to give them a bit more of an introduction. We've got one of the hosts of Fun and Games podcast, Gen Moonen, back on the show. Jen, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, David. I'm very excited to be here.
Of course. And also joined by the host of Nostalgium Arcanum, Playing by Ear, and Still Muppeting podcast, Doug Lief. Doug, welcome back.
Hey, waka, waka, waka. Great to be here. I got my rubber chicken, my slide whistle. I'm ready to go.
Fantastic.
Are you ready to go out the door?
I know it's good having the both of you on this podcast here today. It's good to have you both here to talk about comedy. I know that both of you, of course, love comedy, have different experiences and different types of comedic performance and, lots of comedy media that you enjoy. So I'm really excited to have the both of you here to talk about comedy and games, especially today.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm humbled that you thought of having me on for this, that I somehow qualified to talk about comedy and video games. So I'm really excited to take a look at this because I think this is an angle on games that honestly doesn't get explored very much. So this is going to be interesting.
Seconding the humbling feeling. And video games get compared to other forms of media in so many different ways across so many different metrics and vertices. And you're absolutely right, Doug. This is one that kind of gets lost in the shuffle, even though it really feels so close to the top.
Mm-hmm. The thing that it was I hear this like truism out there a lot, and I've kind of, I've said this in certain cases too, that it's harder for video games to be funny than other types of entertainment. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this. I wanted to kind of interrogate that a little bit, because as we'll get into, I think that yes, in some ways it is harder for video games to be funny, but in other ways, video games can be uniquely funny, and they bring a lot of other types of comedy to the table that, movies and TV and stage performance really can't. So I am excited to dig into that. I want to just kind of throw it to you all for some quick top level thoughts here. When I pitched this conversation to you about comedy in video games and kind of the challenges or unique ways that games can be funny, what came up to your mind? What was the thing that you first thought of about this topic?
So weirdly enough, the first thing that came to mind was something pretty erudite, but there is a French film called Ridicule from the 90s that I quite enjoy. And Ridicule is about these people who were in the court of Louis XIV, and basically their job was like, how funny can you be? And it's all about that social structure of like, who's the wittiest guy in the room? But there's a subplot in the movie about a character who is ultimately they figure out that he's deaf, and he goes to a school for the deaf and comes back having learned, how to sign so he can communicate with everybody. And they, the teacher is asking them questions, and they're responding, and he's translating back into English, and they ask him something. He does a couple of signs, and everyone laughs. And the hearing people, ask him, oh, what did he say? And the guy says, it's untranslatable because it's a play on signs, not a play on words. Uh-huh. And I thought of that because, like, as you said, Dave, like games, especially now, right now that the technology is where it is, games can do all of the vectors of comedy that were already available in other media. You can have funny text, you can have funny performance, you can have funny sounds, you can have funny combinations of pictures and sounds, right? You can do all of the things the other mediums can do. But because games have this interactive component, there are ways games in which in which games can be funny that is unique to the medium. And so as we go through today, I'm kind of always considering what is a play on signs for this, what's
Mm.
the version of that? So that came to my mind first.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and to continue on that idea, some of my background as an actor, as a comedian, as a performer is in immersive theater, which it's one thing to sit down and watch a scripted show start to finish. You know when to laugh, or you can laugh with the audience, having that kind of communal aspect. And as much as video games have become a more communal or online thing, you are often still laughing by yourself on your couch in
Mhm.
these sort of situations. But where it links to immersive theater for me is the ways in that if you are watching a film, reading a book, any of that, you can kind of determine as the creator the pace at which it happens, or there is a bit of that. But
Mhm.
as Doug alluded to, the interactivity throws that out the window. And so you don't know how many times people are going to do something, if they're going to do something, how they're going to find it, and in what order. So there are also aspects of how you create that kind of comedy, that sort of interactivity is truly you cannot predict for it. The more you try to predict for it, the more it's going to blow up in your face. And we see that sometimes in games where they try a little too hard to predict for these things. But also, yes, as technology has evolved, we have a greater toolbox, and games can be funny in so many ways, but also games are still limited. And sometimes leaning on those seams can be hilarious in ways that no other medium can be because they do not have those limitations, nor do they sometimes, nor do they not have the lack of limitations. There are ways that games can be truly unlimited in certain directions that
Mhm.
unless you explore it, you're never gonna find the joke, but there are jokes everywhere floating up there if you have the eyes to see or the right analog stick to, invert the y-axis and look up for it.
Right. Now you touched on something there, Jen, that I wanted to kind of springboard us into the first kind of section of this discussion, which I do think that there are unique challenges to games trying to be funny
Mhm.
that may end up with jokes not landing, for example. And so one of the things that I and we also have a lot of responses from people in the Discord server, per usual with these discussion episodes. A lot of things that people in the Discord pointed out too. A lot of people did talk about that comedic timing.
Mhm.
Um, if you're watching a play, if you're watching a movie or stand up comedy, for
Mhm.
example, they can set up and control the timing of jokes and punchlines and things like that. And games just there's an extra variable in video games in that the player is controlling when they go places, what direction the camera is facing, all of these things. Like anything outside of a cutscene, you have this extra. And if you listen to video developers talk about this, players are so unpredictable where they'll design a thing and then they'll hand it to play testers and the person just goes off to the side and they're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, look right in front of you. Like, this it's a very unpredictable thing, introducing this person with agency into your game, and then for this discussion into your joke. So this was one of the first things that I thought of is it can be a challenge because you're not in control of the timing of comedy in the same way that a stand-up comedian would be, for example.
Yeah, the setup and release of tension has to be either very quick or very asynchronous for it
Mm.
to land at all.
Yeah, what's the old saying, of course, timing is everything with comedy. But it's not the only thing, I will say.
Right.
And my background, just so you have my comedy bona fides, I'm a
Yeah.
lawyer by day, but I did theater starting in high school. I did a lot of written comedy, writing columns and things. And then my main thing is I did improv for about 15 years. So
Mhm.
Mhm.
I've and improv, I think, is a good analog for this because improv is also wildly unpredictable. And there's a difference between things that are funny and jokes. Like jokes are a subset of comedy where you deliver a pattern and then you do something to play with that pattern that is unexpected and therefore produce comedy, right? That's how jokes specifically work. But like in improv, that may not happen. because you're not trying to set things up. What is funny is watching, something come off the rails completely, and watching actors, tap dance to try and justify things. So, like in a video game, there are ways in which sometimes the comedy is accounted for, right? Where like, yes, you can go anywhere, but then when you decide to talk to an NPC, we go into a menu, and the cadence of speaking to that NPC is controlled again, and we can get jokes out of that character, and then you're given free reign to move your character wherever you want, right? So think like a comedy game. Psychonauts is a comedy game. You stop to talk to a character, they say funny shit, but it's controlled. Whereas I think we were talking, I can't remember if we said it on mic or off mic, but like Baby Steps you mentioned, right? There's all sorts of ways in which funny things can happen. Things can emerge that are funny in a game. Like go on YouTube and watch just clips of almost any game where shit goes wrong, whether it's like GTA or, a Souls game or whatever, where like things just don't happen the way you expect. And that's an emergent form of comedy that is totally divorced from the like setup and timing that makes jokes happen.
Yeah, comedy in video games often works best when it is emergent. We are given a toolbox. We are given a set of restrictions or of props even. The idea of, okay, you've given me all these wacky costume pieces in Saints Row 3 and 4. Can I wear them in every cutscene? Yeah, of course you can. Even the really serious ones? Yeah, isn't that great? Or whatever strange item that you happen to have, and I can't believe I'm getting away with this. And much like improv, we all go into it as audience, as participant, knowing that, well, we're just going to make some problems. We're going to go yes and we're going to keep justifying it until we get to the end.
Yeah, look at gluing things together in Tears of the Kingdom, right? That's a good,
yeah.
Hey, I made a giant dildo that like zaps people with lasers, whatever.
Right.
It allows you a certain amount of, you can do whatever you want with it, but they've also got those points that it locks to. And what happens? Well, let's play out the physics.
Yeah. Yeah, the game developers for Tears of the Kingdom certainly didn't design that dildo that shoots lasers joke.
Or they wouldn't say it publicly if they did.
Well, I'm sure that during development, they were like, hey, look at this giant dick that we made that shoots lasers. But they certainly didn't put it there and tell you to do it as a joke. That all comes from your creativity to design something like that. Or like I remember in Tears of the Kingdom seeing like someone made torture devices for all the moblins that like spins around and spanks them forever until the thing runs out of batteries. Like that is comedy that maybe they didn't fully account for when doing that. And the emergent comedy is something that a lot of people in the Discord brought up too. So I do want to bring up some of their thoughts as well. So Artful Scruff, for example, said that most of the laughs that I've had in games have come from emergent moments and mostly from unintentional ones. And there are definitely games designed to have emergent humor, which isn't the same as scripted humor. And we've also got some other comments from other folks on the subject. So Jen, you want to take Josh from IndieQuest?
Yeah, Josh had said on the Discord that I feel like being funny in a game is different than any other medium. We have games like Skin Deep or Baby Steps where the act of playing bring legitimate laughs. Few games are as funny when all hell breaks loose in Skin Deep. You throw pepper on a dude's face, set fire to a hand sanitizer dispenser, and the pure chaos of the mechanics are hilarious.
Yeah. And so they put all of these elements around and they build these interlocking game mechanics and systems to create those emergent moments where you're in this chaotic situation and the way that you decide to get out of it is to set hand sanitizer dispensers on fire and let fucking chaos loose after that. We also have some people that brought up the quote, the friend slop multiplayer games that are kind of emergent comedy generators with friends. I think that's basically why people enjoy playing those so much. I mean, there is a challenge and with some of them, like I've watched people play the game RV there yet, which doesn't seem like there's a whole lot going on except you and your friends getting into some funny shit together, like driving an RV, smoking a cigarette with the door open and like push your friend out of the door of the RV, have fun. Who gives a shit? That's what the game is. Doug, we have a comment from Yorkie here about the game Peak, if you want to take that.
Sure. One of the funniest moments I had in Peak recently was I was playing with a friend who had fallen down and told me he would not make it and I should continue, which I, of course, did. Now, Peak has this fun little mechanic that if one player gets too far ahead of the team, an NPC called the Scout Master starts chasing them with its one goal of throwing the player back down the mountain. Of course, my friend did not know this, and he continued exploring around the cliff and did not die immediately to observe my progress. So suddenly, next thing I know, I'm being chased by this frankly terrifying creature, and I get picked up and thrown down the mountain. So my unaware friend can only hear my screams of terror as I fall down past the cliff he had kept to and straight down to the bottom. Yeah, I mean, this is the fun of like, just throwing a bunch of shit in the air and seeing where it lands, right? Like, as you said, chaos, right? Just the hilarity of things breaking, falling apart. It's just a completely different wavelength of comedy than something that is, with a great deal of wit and skill assembled to, engineer comedy. So like I was thinking of this movie, one, because we did a podcast on my show recently about it, but also I think it relates to games, which is Groundhog Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Groundhog Day is a guy who has to go restart something over and over again. But Groundhog Day as a film is a masterpiece of structure to create comedy by means of, repetition. And so games can do that sort of thing. They absolutely can. But what Yorkie is talking about here is the absolute opposite, where the fun is, this is just it's a food fight. It's basically the same as a food fight. We're just shit's getting thrown all over, and it's fun and hilarious because consequences are out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, when we play games, we are constantly assessing the boundaries. Where are the invisible walls? What things can I grab onto? How much can we interact with? What things can we interact? What happens if I just keep pushing? And so there again, we can run into all kinds of situations. Whenever you play a game, you are trying to quote unquote win. Whatever that is, whether you are trying to reach the credits, whether you are trying to get a high score, whether you are completing an objective, even if that objective is not one that the game gives you, this gives a sense of tension. Tension and release is key in a lot of instances, and especially in comedy. And the sort of, friend slop and baby steps, QWOP, surgeon simulator, trombone champ, job simulator. These are games where in any other game, we are competent, we are heroes, we are the best of the best, or whatever it is. These games beg to differ. And we have a background or an idea of, well, if I'm playing this, if I'm saving the president, if I'm playing this trombone, if I'm doing the surgery, I'm good at it. I, the player, it may not be, but my avatar could be. You want to complete the thing, but the fact that you suck at it, you and the controls don't help you, further throws that down the well, down the mountain, everything else, and you can enjoy the emergent failure that comes from it. It yet again is one of those improv games where you've got the two people and one of them is the hands trying to be the host of a cooking show. It's a Swedish chef situation.
Work, work, work.
Work, work. Chicken in the biscuit.
Trombone Champ's a great example of just the game. The act of playing the game is funny. There's nothing about that game that is meant to be serious or like even
Except
if you're
the title screen. It's Dark Souls as hell. That's it.
I actually don't think I've seen the title screen, but like the fact that you never sound good playing Trombone Champ. It's just funny. I remember the first time I ever watched someone stream it, I was just laughing the whole time because of how shitty it sounds. They're playing like, I don't know, Happy Birthday or
they're playing public domain songs. And
yeah,
if you play perfectly, you sound like a crappy MIDI trombone playing Take Me Out to the Ball Game.
Yeah. If you play perfectly, and most of the time you're not, because it's the control scheme is such that like you have to like mouse way up or way down to hit those notes, and like you're gonna slide into them and sound off key for a while. It's just funny. By nature, it's designed to be silly and ridiculous.
Well, you hit on something that I've been thinking about, which is that games are the only medium that have a fail state, right? You can't fail a book, you can't fail watching a movie. And you're going to fail generally quite a bit. And so that failure can be a great vector for comedy. So, like Dave, you and I covered Secret of Monkey Island, which is obviously a very funny game.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Failure in that game, you can't die, but obviously clicking on something that does not move your progress, it has to result in something. And in that game, it's always a joke, right? So,
Mhm.
like, even if it's just, I want to look at object, the description of that object is going to be funny. It's a failure in that it moves you no further, but it's a great chance to do something funny. I remember playing like Pilot Wings with friends, and like crashing a fucking plane is
Mm-hmm.
funny. Like, it's not what you're supposed to do, but you can laugh at your failure in
Mhm.
games. I mean, again, watching, even if something as simple as just, Pac-Man getting cornered and then
Mm.
dying can be a laugh. So,
And
yeah.
And they put all those death animations in the Crash Bandicoot games where you're not trying to die over and over again. It doesn't advertise itself as a brutally difficult game, but you are going to fail. And
Mhm.
so why not get electrocuted? Why not have the shoes, bob up to the top of the surface if you fall into the water? Have a little bit of fun with it, because probably the only other medium, I mean, actually Groundhog Day is a great example of a film that shows a fail state, because it's basically character development, the movie, and or like save scumming your way to February 3rd.
Yeah.
But it is also akin to a Wile E. Coyote cartoon where there is a game that I was playing a lot last year, and I'll probably be playing it again now that I'm talking about it, Level Devil. That is meant to be, it is a 2D platformer. It looks like it could be on the Atari 2600. And the entire point of it is these are single room puzzles all around different themes of like 5 rooms at a time. And it is meant to fuck with you. This is Kaizo design. This is haha screw you design, but consistent from room to room. The very first room, it's just you go to the right to a door. A few steps before the door, the floor opens up, you fall through.
Oh, yeah.
You
I've seen
learn
this, yeah.
that there is a trigger that opens that up, you jump over it. Cool. You get to the next room. You go, cool. I jumped over that one. And then another one opens up.
Mhm.
Kind of thing. And it has that, I've now ordered the Acme rocket shoes and those fly off and my feet are gone now kind of
Mhm.
feeling. But it's quick. You start again. And it felt, the funny part was failing over and over again. And the amount of times that I would think I was outsmarting it and it was ready for me to try to outsmart it. And that was where I screwed up. If I just done it normally, I'd have been fine. Yet again, you watch enough Wile E. Coyote cartoons and he thinks he's outsmarted it, he would have been fine. And so there again, that's probably one of the only other spaces I can think of where, yeah, you get a fail state. But Doug, you're absolutely right. That is something truly unique to video games that can be a gold mine.
Yeah. Now, Doug, I know that you are with me in the From Software fandom.
Mhm.
Jen, have you played many of the Souls Elden Ring games?
Nope.
Okay. So this is going to be the token moment in the podcast where I say the thing that everyone already knows, which is that the From Software games are legitimately very funny games,
Mhm.
and a lot of it comes from that tension and release, and the way that you die is often funny. Like, not necessarily in the like, I'm fighting this boss 20 times and it keeps killing me, like that's not necessarily funny, but the times when you're in the environment and something busts through a door and attacks you or kicks you off a ledge, like that shit is funny. Silk Song, same thing. I laughed when I got hit by the bench traps in Silk Song because it's an enormous buildup of tension in that game for this joke basically to punch you down into this grub or maggot infested water or something like that when you thought you were in a safe place. And this is also, I have an example from Elden Ring, two examples actually. One of them, they're actually both examples of comedic timing that is just like they've set up a joke in video game form and they figured out how to time it in a way that makes it funny. I remember reading someone wrote in another Discord server. I don't remember who. So if you're listening, you know who you are. But there's this time in Elden Ring that I remembered too, where you're in those underground like crypts, And you walk in, you see a pressure plate, there's an enemy, you step on the pressure plate, it shoots an arrow and it kills the enemy. You're like, sweet, I know how these work. You go into another tunnel, you see a pressure plate, there's 2 enemies, it shoots arrows, it kills the 2 enemies. You're like, all right, kick ass. You go into a third tunnel and you're like, you see a pressure plate, you see an enemy, and you're like, all right, time to go. And you step on the pressure plate and it shoots an arrow from behind you and kills you. And you're like, you motherfuckers, you got me. That is a timed up joke via gameplay in Elden Ring. And the From Software games are actually full of these throughout all the Souls games, Elden Ring, and all of those games too. And I think it is because you're so high tension all the time in those games because of how hard they are, that when they hit you with a timed up joke death like that, I can't help but to laugh.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, as a fan of those games, like the first time a mimic gets you is pretty goddamn funny, right? Because you see a treasure chest, you're like, oh, good treasure, but I'm not gonna touch that thing until I clear all these enemies out so I can safely open it.
Yes.
So you go through all this, you kill all these things, you're like, phew, okay, time for my reward. And then it's not just that the treasure chest attacks you, but they're so goofy looking. Like, there's something really fun about having this thing like stand up. Sometimes they'll like get up on their legs and then attack.
Doing those weird little those little voices that they do. Like they're so goofy.
Yeah, they are. That team is very good at building these trolls into games. And even though there's player interactivity, they can't guarantee exactly what order you'll always do things or where you'll be in the environment. Like the crypt example you gave, like generally you're in a hallway, right? You're probably going to run into it. And if it's okay if the joke doesn't work, I mean, there is no work of medium where every joke in it lands for everybody. That's just, you just have to accept that as the person writing the jokes, I just have to write enough of them. And if, a decent percentage of them are funny, that's okay.
Yeah, I think if it doesn't slow down the action enough, or if it was something where somebody went far enough off the beaten path that like you've earned this / deserve this, I think you're going to be fine. You can take the airplane method of just like fill it up.
Yeah.
I was thinking that even these sort of like trap jokes or these joke, moments, go back to the NES, if not earlier, that immediately made me think of the first Star Tropics, where in an early dungeon, you can go through a hidden door and find a reward. And if you do the same exact secret door thing in that room, you get to another room that has a hidden reward. And if you do that again, you enter a room that is nothing but water, you drown and die instantly. And there's a little bit of, well, you brought this onto yourself, or at what point do you walk away, or like, well, what did I expect? It's had to stop sometime kind of feeling. And so there are those setups that you can have that are absolutely, you are following the breadcrumbs to, is it a loaf or is it an anvil that's going to fall on your head? Either way, we do this when we play games because that's how we find secrets. That's how we find cool cosmetic items. That's how we find secret cutscenes that fill in the lore, how we find super bosses and strange items and sequence breaks. And finding something funny can be just as much of a reward if presented well and it brings you along.
And I think part of it too, like especially with the Souls games or, probably with a difficult NES game too, like you're in the mindset that you're gonna fail at a certain point. So it takes the sting out of like dying one time in a hallway in Elden Ring. It doesn't matter. Like if you've played the game for 20 hours, you know that it doesn't matter really. You can get back to that point. It's gonna be fine. And so it makes it easier for those things to be funny. I have a contribution from Discord from Pieboy that is like a 3 bullet point thing about making failure funny that I thought was really well thought out. So I wanted to bring that up and see if the both of you have anything to add to this. So Pieboy says, I think there are some key ingredients to make failure funny. Number 1, feedback needs to be sudden. When I think of funny moments, they live and die by their immediacy, like getting kicked off a cliff by a skeleton in Dark Souls or getting bounced into a pit of spikes in Spelunky. A long, slow result doesn't have the same effect, like watching your heart slowly drain in The Binding of Isaac is not especially funny. That can be joy-sucking. The second point is that something significant should be at stake. A lot of the times, the laughs come as a release of tension, which means you need to create tension in the first place. Again, getting kicked off a ledge in Dark Souls means losing currency, losing a couple minutes of progress, etc. Or falling off a tower in baby steps. You've lost your progress up that tower. And then the third point is there needs to be some level of unpredictability or surprise. In something, Pieboy says, in something like an endless runner like Subway Surfers, the first two conditions, sudden and something at stake, seem to be met. But losing isn't funny because you already know how the run will eventually end. There's no surprise. He says there needs to be enough systemic complexity that a loss could come in many different ways, like Spelunky, Noita, or even baby steps, something with a physics system that can be hard to predict, or on level designers, creating unpredictable traps like in Dark Souls. So we've been talking about failure being funny, and I think that this is a nice like layout of some different components to making it actually funny and not frustrating, or, you know, at least let the joke land more than you being upset that you died in the game.
Yeah, I would say so. And I would maybe wiggle a little bit on the idea of feedback needs to be sudden.
Hmm.
Because there is that thing of like, yes, the getting kicked off the cliff is used as an example on 2 bullet points here, and there is something very tension releasing and funny in that very like, "Easy, easy, screw you, buddy," kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there are also moments where there is the humor in how far it goes, or like this sort of slow onslaught, and you discover how deep this bit is going,
Hmm.
where you can't die in Secret of Monkey Island. You can hold your breath for 10 minutes, unless you're underwater for over 10 minutes. And then you have to, all of your options change. You know, you can bob, you can bloat, you can float, and you can just kind of explore, how screwed am I here? Well, start again kind of feeling. Or something where games in their interactivity and their allowance of exploration, there is curiosity. There is, wait a minute, does this work? Or what happens when I do this? There are occasions where it may not show up immediately, but when it comes back later, it can be very, very funny. It
Hmm.
can be funny to people in Chrono Trigger if, when you're put on trial early in the game, you realize acting like a typical RPG protagonist makes you look terrible in a court of law as a good person. Or one of my favorite games is Metal Gear Solid 3, and there is a sequence where you are in walking the line between life and death, and you are faced with the lives you have ended on your mission.
Uh-huh.
And depending on what you have done to people, that is how those spirits are. Where you shot them is where they're bleeding from. If you shot them in the crotch, they are holding their crotch, bleeding, and yelling at you about that.
Hmm.
You can shoot, you can kill somebody in an area where there's a vulture. The vulture eats the person. You can kill the vulture and then eat the vulture. And that person will now be screaming at you that you ate them in that later sequence. I think if you got that feedback immediately, it wouldn't be nearly as funny as
Hmm.
if you explored, you played a little. And one could argue that the feedback is instantaneous and the guy shows up and you're like, what is it? Oh, oh my.
Right.
But it does show something to how far the the setup or the exploration can go in either direction of the like the trigger, the like the crossbow bolt being launched kind of thing.
Mm.
And you can't go in both directions all the time, but because of the interactivity and the explorative quality of games, there is a lot to find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and immediacy and all that. I like all of the points that Pie Boy made. They are
Mm,
very context dependent, and so obviously it's not a universal rule. So like when you talk about like feedback has to be immediate, there's also the form of something happens in a game where like you get hit with a status effect or something, and maybe it's not immediate death, but it's 30 seconds of oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, and then you die. Right? That can be
yeah.
very
Hmm.
funny too. You know, even if it's something that you didn't mean to do, right? You're Mario and you're swimming in 3D and you're fucked by the N64 and its clumsy controls and geometry. And now you're like, how the fuck do I get out of this underwater thing? Dun, 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 dead. Right. That can be funny. Watching Sonic the Hedgehog like almost drown, right? Funny, but not
Mhm.
immediate.
Hmm.
And something significant should be at stake. Maybe doesn't be that significant. It can be just one simple like death. It doesn't have to be the death in Dark Souls where it's like you could die and like, oh, well, I just died, or, oh shit, I died and I had an enormous amount of currency with me. And
Yeah.
now I really fucked. Yeah. That does set progress way back. Both of them can still be funny. So I don't know that all of that needs to be there. I do agree that like unpredictability or surprise can be important, right? Because as you said, like dying in an endless runner, like probably not funny. Having too many, it's like having too many lines in Tetris. Like that's never going to make you laugh. But
Right.
beyond that, I think that's a very broad category of like ways things can come at you and be surprising and hilarious. So.
Yeah. I think that the things that Pie Boy has written out kind of explain a little bit why I think dying while exploring in a game like Elden Ring is often funny, but dying in a boss fight is not, because there's no unpredictability to dying fighting, Mesmer in the Elden Ring DLC. That shit's extremely hard. I know I'm going to die. It's not going to be funny when it happens, but when you round a corner in the underground in Elden Ring and you see those giant rolling ball enemies and they roll at you and you're like, the absurdity and kind of like weird sentience that these rolling balls have, and then they kill you and you're in this bewildered state where you're like, what the fuck was that? And it's kind of funny to have that thing be the thing that kills you. Like, I think that's that unpredictability that lends to comedy in Elden Ring. Or like, I remember the thing, probably the most I laughed in Elden Ring was the first time I discovered the Vulgar Militia. If you remember them, the tiny warriors, they're like 1 foot tall and they like leap out of bushes and surprise you. And it's so weird and goofy, these little designs, and they're screaming at you in like their little Ewok voices. And you're like, what the fuck is this? And then suddenly they're killing you. Like, it's funny when that shit happens. And these games, the From Software games, are just full of these. Like it's this, they have learned to walk the balance between this thing's going to kill you and it's also funny, you're probably going to laugh at it. Like if you've bought into what we're doing with this game, you're going to laugh when these things jump out and ambush and kill you.
Right. And this is all, again, in that vein of, I won't call it unintentional comedy, but it's not scripted per se, right? This
Right.
is, which is to say nothing of like all of the great stuff that games can do to be funny within a scripted space or even a semi-scripted space. Like I'm trying to remember if you covered, I Think You Should Leave, Dave, if you covered that game. I think that's what it's called. Or no, thank goodness you're here. I think You Should Leave.
You Should Leave is the comedy show.
Right. But I do have it on the list as like, I think one unique way that games can be funny is I think that there's like a leeway for silliness with games that a lot of other, like an indie production, like a sketch show or a stage play or something can be really fucking silly. But like, especially as comedy in movies has really, like, outside of kids movies really aren't straight up comedies very often anymore, like that you go see in the theater and shit like that. So I think like there's a silliness that games get an allowance for that allows for comedy, and a good point being the way that you interact with characters in Thank Goodness You're Here is you walk up and slap them in the face. Like that's how you interact with the world in that game, if I remember right. So like that, just designing that's how you interact with the world, that's funny. Like, is that what you were going for there, Doug?
Yeah, that. And I mean, exactly. Like they're delivering jokes to you as you walk up and slap characters, but there's funny things happening in the background. Like that game is purely a comedy engine for the delivery of comedy bits. But one of the fun things games can do in that regard is because they're not bounded in any way by time, by the constraints of budget or special effects. I mean, there's budgets, but not in the way that like, you could, if you can dream it up, you can put it on screen, whether it's a drawing or a three-dimensional object, right?
You don't need to make a 3D model. If you want it to fly, you don't need to buy a crane. You just need to move the thing around.
Right, exactly. You can make anything happen on screen that your imagination can do without the way that like in film, you would have to like, shit, we've got to CGI this thing. We've got to put it on a gimbal. We got to do all this stuff. So because your imagination can run pretty wild with stuff that can happen, the kinds of silly things you can do. I mean, and just look at, there were these point and click, I'll call them games, that Monty Python put out in the 90s.
Yes.
And they were just literally like, click on somewhere on the screen and some weird shit's going to happen. And
Complete
obviously,
waste of time was amazing. Every time I think of a help button, I think of complete waste of time.
yeah, complete waste of time did it. They did ones for the Holy Grail and for Meaning of
Yep.
Life as well.
Yep. Yep.
And again, just comedy delivery systems, but from a team that obviously knows a lot about highly scripted stuff. That's extremely like in terms of the math of comedy. Monty Python's about as complex as it gets, but you're allowing this format to just go like, we're just going to let weird things happen in a
Mhm.
way that they couldn't ever even hope to do in their own films and sketches.
Well, Monty Python did work in a lot of different mediums and used each of those mediums to the fullest of their sense of absurdity. I am a huge fan of their records,
Yeah.
which there again, Matching Tie and Handkerchief is the only three-sided record, or that's how they advertise it because they had two parallel grooves. So on one side, depending upon where you drop the needle, you got a completely different track list. Or one of them that played with the very end of the run-out groove, there's a bunch of like mafiosos there. And it's like, oh, sorry, I scratched your record. Oh, sorry, I scratched your record. Oh, sorry, kind of thing to play with the medium itself. And
Mhm.
that is something that must always be held in mind when making comedy. How are you delivering it? I mean, in general, for me, if you tell a story, why are you telling it through the medium you are? Is it by limitation? Is it by preference? Or how are you utilizing it? And so that is definitely a piece of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I think of something like that, I think of like West of Loathing is a good example of
Mm.
a game that it is joke after joke after joke. Like everything in the game is basically a joke, down to the way that you walk around can be a joke in West of Loathing. And so that's like a quote, a more traditional vehicle for jokes, but within the context of a game, we're making an RPG. What aspects of an RPG can we then turn into comedy? Okay, here's how you move around. You're not a wizard. I think they call them. You're like a bean slinger because you're like an old
Mm,
west cowboy in West of Loathing. It's been a
I
while
think
since I
so.
played that game,
Yeah.
but like playing with character archetypes, playing with the types of characters that you meet. What kind of weird shopkeepers are we going to have in an RPG, in this Western themed RPG? So something that's like it's more traditional like jokes, but within the medium of games, we're taking all these different aspects of an RPG and like what can we mine for jokes in all of these different places?
And there is sort of scope and stress to think about in this as well. You
Mhm.
can have truly absurd, ridiculous characters in a game that are comedy gold, but you can't overuse them.
Mhm.
Psychonauts is filled with spectacular characters with rich inner lives. And sometimes you can even enter those rich inner lives, but all of them do. And if you played as each and every one of them, it would get very old very quickly.
Yeah.
I would not want to play as Dogen, but love
Wanna look
having
at
him
him.
in the game.
Yeah.
And so this was something that would come up a lot in mascot platformers. Like, look, Gex has plenty of funny lines, but when it's basically a soundboard that you are not in control of,
Mm.
that just kind of happens while you're trying to play a game, it gets old, it gets stale. Cool, a funny moment happens before a boss fight, then you lose the boss fight. Oh, cool, I get to watch the funny moment again. Yay. Design, you can still have the funny moment, but you need to be able to have the boss fight start from after the cutscene. Whatever those pieces are. I've often said and continue to, and this conversation is further cementing that for me, the closest analog of mediums to video games is live theater, I think, or live
Mm.
performance, where every time you play a level, every time you start the game up, you are starting a fresh performance. The players are there. The script whatever the script may be for the show, but you are taking another tack at it. And, you know, fellow theater actors and folks can definitely attest to. After a while, some jokes just get very, very frustrating. And sometimes you do things to make them more fun. And if the game lets you do that, cool, great. If not, that can get very stale very quickly. And I didn't come to this show again so I could hear that really bad joke again. I came for this other aspect, this other piece. And
Mhm.
these need to be weighed and measured in scope.
There's a certain level of like you interacting with the world that does kind of make sense with that theater analogy and how things will be different if you in my limited theater experience in high school, you do the same show multiple times. It's not going to go the exact same way every single time. Deliveries will be a little bit off. This person, says their line a little bit funnier than they did the night before or something like that.
Audience reacts a little different.
Audience
and you
reacts
feed off
differently.
that.
Yeah. And you can get that kind of unpredictability in games too, even if it's like unintentional, like I started thinking about like, if I booted up a file of Skyrim and played for 5 hours and you two both did the same thing, we would have like some weird janky types of unpredictable things happen that are funny. That
Of course.
yeah, like that kind of thing. Like, or maybe it's scripted, maybe it's not. Maybe it's scripted, but I had it framed up right in the center and I saw it in all of its glory, like the guy falling out of the sky in Morrowind at the beginning. Or maybe you didn't see it or something like that. So that joke lands in this weird, cool way for me, but doesn't for you. Like, the example that we've been using with like comparing it to movies and stuff. If the three of us watch a movie, we're all seeing the exact same movie. We see the same delivery, the same timing, the same framing of shots and everything like that. And games just have this weird, unpredictable layer over them, even the most like scripted ones outside of maybe a visual novel, like that just, it can generate unpredictable comedy weirdness.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think again that theater analogy applies, right? Because somewhere right now, someone is mounting a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, right? A comedy that is 400 years old. We're going to get up and tell these jokes again, and they still work, right?
Thou speakest aright.
Yeah, because there's something about like, what games are often replayed, right? I mean, I don't replay everything, but in theory, if I've heard this joke, if I've fought this boss, if I've done all these things, why would I want to do it again? And the answer is because each time I do it, it's going to be a little bit different than last time. Like, it's like, oh, here we go, Mega Man 2, the familiar music, and I know the order to do all the bosses in, but it's still going to be the act of playing it out has value in a way that like, movies may not. And even still, there's movies I'm going to rewatch multiple times. There are comedies I've seen, I know every line, I know every beat, and I'm still going to laugh because there's something about the construction of it that still works that I can take pleasure from, even if it's never going to hit me quite as hard as the first time I heard it.
The experience changes, it metamorphosizes, as well as the fact that maybe this is just my neurodivergent ass, but when I know where the jokes are, I have a certain joy in almost like having the timing in my head and knowing when it happens. If there's going to be a sudden drop of some kind, I can be like 3, 2, 1, yes, there it is, kind of thing. And whether that's in a game, whether that's in a film, whether that's listening to a comedy album, and in games, there is also the fact of if a comedic moment is just that, like quick and off you go, or it doesn't interrupt the flow of gameplay, I can enjoy it more I can enjoy more repetitions of it. If it's something that has to like, camera zooms in, everything stops, waka waka, I will Statler and Waldorf that shit. But something like Portal is an excellent example of a game that is filled with comedy that has been memed and repeated, and I can't have the experience of playing Portal 1 and 2 for the first time ever again. I still replay them. I still think they're hilarious, and I do still really enjoy Cave Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's also something to where like you can sit back and admire a joke if it's well enough constructed. You just have to go like, that is a work of art. So like, Jen, I recently did a podcast with your partner, Matt Storm, on the Naked Gun. And there is a scene in the first Naked Gun movie that just, I mean, it's been a while since I had seen it, and it blew me away where Frank, Leslie Nielsen goes down to the docks to pump a source for information. And the guy's like, I don't know nothing. I didn't see anything. And he gives him a $20 bill and he goes, maybe this will jog your memory. And he goes, yeah, I seen him, blah, blah, blah. And then that guy asks Leslie Nielsen a question and he goes, well, I'm not so sure. And he takes the $20 bill and gives it back to him and goes, well, maybe this will jog your memory. And they keep doing that, passing the same $20 bill back and forth in a way. I'm like, whatever member of the team came up with this, like fucking bravo. I could watch it all day.
Yeah.
because I just have to sit back and be impressed by like how clever that is. And games can do that too. There are wonderful moments in games that I still think are funny, games that are 30 years old more at this point, that I still have to go back and go like, that's pretty fucking funny. Like you got
Mhm.
me, so
And some of it is the construction of the joke, and some of it is the performance of the characters. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't think Cave Johnson, as an example, would succeed so well if it wasn't J.K. Simmons, who played the patent absurdity of it all deadly straight. And there
Yeah.
again, Leslie Nielsen playing everything that Frank Drebin does as it's the most serious thing in the world.
Mhm. Yeah. This is actually a point that several people brought up in Discord about one of the challenges for games being funny. And just to kick it off, like this is something that I have thought about. You know, you mentioned the Naked Gun, or if we talk about Saturday Night Live, or things that we consider to be very funny. Um, those are often written by professional comedy writers. Like their job is to write jokes and make things funny. Whereas game developers, and this is what Chris Coplain from the Retro Hangover said, which I kind of agree with. Chris says, I would assume most games writers are not comedians. So if they're deliberately trying to be funny, some of that can fall flat. And I think about that, and especially with like a smaller indie team or something, you do have a lot of like funny games. But there are a lot of games, indie to AAA, that are just, they're trying. I know that they're trying to be funny, and sometimes they're just not. And you can chalk some of that up to the same joke doesn't work for every person that takes it in, of course. But I do think there's some truth to like gaming is such a multidisciplinary artistic medium, and the smaller the teams get, the more everyone has to wear a bunch of different hats. And sometimes the people who are writing the jokes are not professional comedy writers. And I think that can be a challenge. Not to say you have to be a pro to write a funny joke, but it certainly doesn't hurt. You know what I mean? Like, I think there is an element to writing in games has extra challenges, and the people writing them are not always comedians. And I think that I wonder if that is something that, you know, there's a difference between being in a room full of comedy writers working on SNL, or working on what I assume to be the Naked Gun or something like that, versus being writers in games who have to write for all different types of situations, you know?
I think some of that also is there does need to be some spontaneity in this. Like, yeah, anybody can write comedy, and the best comedy writers write duds. This is a thing that
Yeah.
must be kept in mind. But some of it too is, yeah, knowing the medium you're writing for or the type of joke you're trying to tell.
Mhm.
One of the other reasons I think of video games as more theater than film is the difference in theater acting versus film acting. You
Mm.
can convey a lot of emotions with very subtle movements, and there are things that you could do with your eyes or how you set your lips that tells a huge story. Whereas theater, you need to play all the way to the back seats. You have to be as big as possible when you do anything.
Mhm.
And no matter how sophisticated animation has gotten in games, and it has gotten sophisticated, we've moved on from marionettes to theater acting as far as how we can go with this. And if you are writing for film, you are going to have some things fall flat unless you have fun with that. Or there is noticing when something just works for you and like leaning into it. If you probably one of the things where like games writers aren't comedy writers can cause issue is not knowing when you've got something funny on your hands, where I think of a funny moment being, I think it's the first Half-Life where it's the like, I check the math. Wait, you check the math, right? And the dog just shakes its head. That was an accident. There was just
Mm.
a timing in the dog's idle and in the robot's idle animation that just like
Mm.
happened to put its head down sort of thing. And it was just like, well, that's too perfect. We're keeping that. We're doing that. And
Yeah.
sometimes just it's emergent comedy also happens on the design side. That is what a lot of comedy writing is. Shooting the shit back and forth and going, no, that's good. Put that down.
Mm.
And then you give it to the next person, to the actor, to the performer, or you are the actor and the performer, and getting it on its legs also does something. You need to beta test written comedy is kind of the thing. And so, yes, I imagine there's a lot of comedians and comedy writers who aren't good comedians or comedy writers. So blaming the fact that they're game designers isn't necessarily the whole thing, but
Yeah, of course.
there is whether or not those things are tested or whether or not people are listening to each other when putting it into the game.
Yeah.
It really depends on the individual team, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, obviously, there's many, many very funny people I've met throughout my life who have never spent a day on stage or, worked in comedy. A sense of humor has nothing to do with that.
Yep.
But there is you do have to really work at it, especially if you're trying to create a work that's deliberately funny. Um, and you have to be mindful of your limitations here. So, for example, I've heard Jerry Seinfeld talk about how he throws out 90% of the material he writes because he has to, that's the ratio. Like 90%, in one of the most successful comics of all time, he freely admits 90% of the stuff I write is shit. That's why I write so much of it. So I have the 10% that everyone comes to see. And so that's, I think, true of all comedy writers. So when you're putting comedy into a game, you need to have the knowledge, just as you would with any other comedic endeavor, that like this is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of tries. And you are, as you said, Dave, limited by the medium in certain ways. So like Jen, you said like a lot of these subtle facial expressions and things you can do with a human are a little hard. I mean, they're getting better with like, mocap and stuff that you can do it, but not to the same extent you could do live. And I was thinking of like comparing the example I gave from The Naked Gun. That's a very vaudeville routine of like this is witty. This is comedy math, as opposed to something like Napoleon Dynamite, right? Where the comedy for Napoleon Dynamite is mostly wordless, awkward pauses, right? It's like half the time I'm like, is this even funny at all? Because it's literally just, wow, we're just going to watch this weird yokel stare off into the distance for 35 seconds, right?
We've all played No More Heroes, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can do things that are funny like that. Harder to do that in games because that's based on the subtleties of the way humans interact and emote. So, when you're sitting down to write something, there's so many different types of games and so many different ways comedy can emerge from those games, whether written or scripted or not. As a writer, you've got to take into account, like, not just what's the funny idea, but how am I going to get it across? How is this going to work? What's the delivery system for this joke? Is this joke better as like a funny bit of in-game text than it is if a character says it out loud? If a character says it out loud, let's work on the voice direction and the acting to see, like, is this the funniest take for this joke, right? So I get what Chris is saying, but also it's so dependent on all of the other parts of the team, not just the guy who originally comes up with the idea for the joke,
right?
But everybody involved in having to bring it to life.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you can definitely write a very funny joke, but if the voice performance isn't there, if the timing of like, the blocking in the scene, choreography, all that stuff is weird, then the joke doesn't land. Like that goes back to timing, but in a different way. We do have some other contributions kind of talking about, when I first thought of the idea to interrogate that idea that it's harder for games to be funny, it started with the idea that if a game is trying to be funny in the same way that a movie is trying to be funny, I do think it is harder because there's a lot more happening. And we do have some people that wrote about that kind of basic thing, which goes along with what you were just talking about there, Doug. So we have Nick, we have Steve, and we have Nico Sandman, who all have different ideas. We'll see if these kind of inspire an angle on the conversation here. So Nick, who writes for the online Hard Drive magazine, which is comedy. That's online written satire there, Hard Drive. So Nick says, it's a fine line. I think comedy in general is harder these days, probably across all mediums there. In games, though, you're learning rules, mechanics, and a bunch of other systems to play the game, whereas in movies, you're just sitting back waiting to laugh, which I do think is true. There's a lot less buy-in that a movie requires. You just have to be up for watching the movie. That's all that it takes. Whereas in a game, like Nick says, you got to learn how to fight. Probably you got to know where to go. You got to know who to talk to, all these different moving pieces.
And there can be comedy in teaching those mechanics as well.
Oh, yeah.
We have all had to I would imagine all of us have had to sit through some kind of on-the-job training that is the most boring-ass video or VHS or whatever it is about it. You're
Yeah.
like, what would make this more interesting? If I was actually entertained.
Mhm.
Or the same way that you step on the pressure plate, shoots an arrow. Step on the next pressure plate, shoots 2 arrows. Okay, there's interactivity. Step on the next one, kills you.
Yeah.
Don't trust it, but you
Yep.
are still learning the mechanics and you are learning the world. It becomes harder to do a joke. As Doug pointed out before, like, there is plenty of comedy, but it's harder to do jokes. Because if you're going to do that while also bringing everybody in on this, that's extra resources, that's extra time. And that is, if it falls flat, it sucks.
Yeah.
Again, I think of Airplane and Police Squad, Naked Gun, things like that, where they just go, here's jokes everywhere. We're telling you this joke right now, but there's also something going on in the background. And we are now back at this old camera angle, and now the bulletin board's upside down. And if it's funny, it's funny. If it's not, it's zany, madcap, and just part of the world. You have to weave it in differently.
Mhm. On the note of like tutorial jokes, you immediately made me think of the tutorial in Baby Steps where you
Mhm.
start. Nate is just standing there. They have not taught you how to move yet, which if you haven't played, you use the triggers to control each leg individually. But it just gives you the prompt, press forward on the stick to walk. And you're like, okay, cool, just like every other video game. You press the stick, and because you didn't lift your legs up, Nate just falls flat on his face. And it's a huge joke right at the beginning to just be like, all right, fine. Now we'll teach you how to play the game. Now we got that joke out.
But it teaches you the rules, and it's like, well, what happens if I just do that? It builds it in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what point Nick is trying to make. Is he saying it's harder in games to do comedy because you're learning rules and mechanics and things like that? I would push back on that. I disagree because basically any element you put in to anything, think of it like a caption contest. It's an opportunity for a joke. So, like, I just watched The Great Muppet Caper recently for the podcast. That's a really fucking funny movie, by the way. Like,
It's amazing.
go watch it. But like, one of the things that makes it so funny is the team never misses an opportunity for a joke. So the movie opens, as movies often do, with a bunch of opening credits, and then they could just show that to you, but instead they have Fozzie, Kermit, and Gonzo in a hot air balloon commenting on the credits, making jokes about them, who their names, how long it's going on for. Again, to go to Monty Python, right? Holy Grail. They do a whole bunch of hilarious shit in like subtitles about mooses in the credits to that. So,
mind you, moose bites can be pretty nasty.
yes. So these things aren't limitations, they're opportunities, right? You talked about tutorial jokes, right? You can have just, here's the tutorial, press X to jump, press X twice to double jump. Or you can do that while a drill sergeant is like yelling at you and making you, saying funny things about how inept you are, right?
Basic braining and Psychonauts.
Yes, exactly. Everything that is in the game, there is a chance to make a joke about that thing. So
yes,
what matters, I guess, is do you want to capitalize on that? And that builds into something else we haven't talked about, which is tone. Like, the overall tone of a thing matters a lot to if there is going to be comedy, and if so, what form is it going to take?
Mm-hmm. I think of something like Clair Obscur, which is extremely dark, very depressing most of the time, but that game is legitimately funny because they have a couple of characters that are very good comic relief characters, which you do. I mean, it's not 100% necessary, but like even shit like The Last of Us has comic relief in there from time to time.
Yeah.
And then in Clair Obscur, you have Verso, you have Esquier, you have Monoko, who are just these weirdos that play off of each other really, really well. And I think the comedy in that is enhanced because you've just come probably from someone dying, or just think about the world that the game takes place in. It's terrible. So comedy lands a little bit better in that. And then on the other side, you've got shit like Portal 2 or Thank Goodness You're Here that are just goofs all the time. Or the Loathing games. Those are just like you were talking about with like with Airplane. Like the Loathing games are just jokes every 30 seconds. It's almost nothing but jokes. And that's the tone you're working with.
And then you have things like the Like a Dragon series, Yakuza.
Oh, yeah. Please, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Like, that is well, and there is that kind of thing of the longer an experience is, whether it's a book, a film, a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, you have to have rise and fall. You have to have tension and release. If you start a D&D campaign extremely seriously, it will become the chuckle fuck squad within 3 sessions and vice versa. That's the joke. But that kind of happens. And the Yakuza series, the Like a Dragon series, is very serious.
Yeah.
This is brotherhood. This is honor. This is life and death. I'm going to go race slot cars. And it is
Yeah.
a matter of life and death kind of shit. And it's the way I would describe it to people is it is the most like serious, cool, amazing, like Yakuza film, hard-boiled action drama, little over the top, like Metal Gear Solid's got nothing on the cutscene length. And if you look even 1 inch to the left or right, there is the goofiest shit ever if you have eyes to see and a want to play.
Right.
And that is something that you can choose at your leisure and work in as you want. And if you're somebody who does a lot of side quests, it just becomes like a whole big smorgasbord of like, okay, fine, let me get back to the serious thing. And that also, if you take something serious like that, and it is very melodramatic, it is over the top melodramatic. But if you buy into that tone and that scope, that's exactly what you want. Like, how many ridiculous anime do all of us watch? Do people listening watch that are just like, if I have to describe it to you, I feel like an idiot. Like, this feels so, no, it was the power of friendship. Okay. It was like the love of the village that like let him win. Okay. But it was awesome. Like Yakuza's got that. And
Mhm.
if you throw the absurdity in there, it only highlights that. And I think those serve each other very well. To take a Batman level serious man like Kiryu and put him in stupid situations.
Put him in a
And
room full of men wearing diapers. Yeah.
get that man a diaper. Like, it's amazing. And the same goes for Ichiban, who is a little goofier, but has his own like drama and love and needs. He is neither of them are one note. And the fact that they do serious and silly things highlights that and shows them in different lights. And if you're going to be spending tens of hours, half a dozen games with any of these characters, you have to show those depths and shadows and pieces. Comedy can illuminate serious things and character just as much as a dramatic monologue can, and can be a lot more of a fun ride for the people watching.
Mhm.
Yeah, and to get back to something you mentioned that, I think The Last of Us is a great example actually, where the overriding tone of that game is sadness and horror, right? So like when you get swarmed in Dark Souls, it's kind of funny that you get ganked by all of these dudes. When you get
Right.
swarmed in The Last of Us, you get ripped to pieces by like mushroom monsters, and it's horrifying, right?
Yeah.
But Ellie is a wisecracking machine. She's very funny in that
Mhm.
game, in the series as well. And her lightness, that humor is so important for contrast. Like it makes you fall in love with her more so that you care when bad things happen. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
The master of this is someone like Steven Spielberg, where you look at like Jaws or Jurassic Park, right? Jurassic Park and
Yeah.
Jaws are very scary. They both have hilarious moments. Like it's terrifying to watch those kids get, trapped in a kitchen with raptors. The film also features the world's largest shit, and it's very funny. And
Uh-huh.
it's important, like a good mix of both of those things. Each one makes the other one better. Like the darker
Yeah.
elements make the comedy funny. The funny makes the dark parts seem more serious and dire.
Yeah.
So getting that mix right actually really matters a lot, even when like the jokes in The Last of Us are generally totally scripted. It's no different than a movie, but they need to
Mhm.
be there. Those jokes are like, if without that, it would feel a lot more leaden and morose.
And I
Mhm.
think you hit upon something really interesting, Doug, with the fact that, yeah, in The Last of Us, we really care about what happens to these characters because they are characters. If your tarnished one gets ganked, whatever, you just made that character, you've gone through a character creation system. Like, yes, they have a destiny or whatever it is. Again, as I said before, I haven't played much FromSoft, but it is, you have created the character. It's, your avatar gets fucked over versus this character this person, this realized existence that sort of is having a fatalistic bit of comedy about things, because I very much subscribe to the Carrie Fisher quote, my life has to be funny, because if it's not, that means it's true. and that's just not acceptable.
Mm.
And in those dire situations, you do need that comedy to break the tension for yourself. Why wouldn't a character that you want to feel real in a book, a film, a game do the same thing? And you do feel it all the more when, again, Jill Valentine's a real character, as it were, but I don't feel nearly as bad when she becomes a Jill Sandwich.
Hmm.
Whether that is because the comedy is more quote unquote unintentional, I don't know.
You mentioning the Yakuza games and then you all talking about the need for both the darkness and the comedy, or in Yakuza's case, the melodrama and the comedy.
They're so
The
close to each other.
the things that endear you to Kiryu or Ichiban in those games, but I'm thinking more of Kiryu is
Mhm.
that Kiryu is a stand-up guy based on how he treats the people around him in the melodramatic situations, but you also learn about what kind of guy Kiryu is with how he treats the opportunity or the situation where he finds himself doing like porno modeling in that one thing, or the gusto with which he takes like the answering the phone sex line in the Yakuza 0 minigame, or how he and Ichiban both work with the baby fetish guys in all of the different times that they show up throughout the series. Like
Yeah.
that gives characterization to them too, and kind of rounds out their character in a way that you wouldn't feel. I don't think you'd feel the same endearment to them if they were just Batman, as you said, like loyal and just and good on the moral scale. The way that they are accepting of all these fucking weirdos, Mr. Libido, who you meet in some of the Yakuza games, or the guy who needs to find the world's best dominatrix in Yakuza Like a Dragon. Like
Dragon, yeah, he needs to
you
get beaten.
need to meet those characters to give that extra side to your protagonist in those cases.
And it gives context for all the absurdities that are happening to your character. It's not just oh, this is a filter that's happening to me because it's a game. It is, but it's also, this is the weird world. It's the way that Scott Pilgrim establishes quickly the height of ridiculousness that the world just is. So you
Mhm.
just roll with it. And the
Yeah.
same goes for within games. It is tone, it is context.
I do have a couple of other contributions from people talking about ways that games find challenges to
Mhm.
be funny. We've got a couple more. So, Jen, you want to take Steve from the Indie Quest podcast?
Steve says that they never said that they can't be funny, but it's true that game comedy rarely hits for them. Almost never laughs at a written and delivered joke in a game. The funniest times they happen most in any medium are when the jokes are paced well and build on each other. Stand up is probably the biggest example of that. But most games tend to have large enough gaps between their jokes, gaps where you're doing gameplay stuff, that they don't have the chance to build up. The meter resets between each joke.
Mhm. It's interesting as this is in certain types of games, this is absolutely true. Where we've used a lot of examples of Airplane, Naked Gun, Monty Python, joke after joke after joke, or
Marx Brothers,
joke
yeah.
building on joke, or a joke building on itself throughout a scene, like the exchange of the $20 bill and the Naked Gun type of stuff. And if I'm thinking about Clair Obscur or Yakuza or something, you might have 5 hours between written and delivered jokes. It makes it harder for jokes to build on themselves
Mm.
in this particular way. Like Steve and then Nick earlier, both of them. I don't think they're saying that games are not funny or that they're not often funny. But when I ask specifically about challenges facing
Mhm.
them, I think that this is a way that other like movies, TV shows, sketch comedy, etc., could build and explore a joke that games just can't do it the same way or not as easily.
Yeah, a video game is not a Herald game, and vice versa.
Mm.
Yeah, this has to do with the fact that comedy is generally about patterns, right? We're just going to set up a pattern, we're going to break the pattern. And if there are long gaps between instances of the pattern, it does
Mhm.
make it harder to build a joke off of it. So I can see how where this can be an issue for running gags and things in games, right? But
Yeah.
running gags are not the only game in town.
Yes.
And so like there are plenty of times games will make you laugh because of you just get to know these characters, especially for longer games. Right now, we're talking games that are usually the average like shortish game is going to be at least 8 to 10 hours. hours, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you're already at 5 times the length of a movie. Most games are even longer than that. So now you're talking the equivalent of like a whole season of television or more. The more time you spend with the character. So like if you're the kind of person who's watched, I don't know, 6 seasons of The Office, right? By the time you get to season 6, when, Stanley does something, you're like, "Huh, that's such a Stanley thing to say." But you don't
Yeah.
get to that without 6 seasons of being used to that character in a way that like Groundhog Day is very funny, but we only spend 2 hours with Bill Murray, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
So games have this opportunity to build longer things. They have the ability to build these character moments. So it's not that there's less comedy in games or less opportunity, but for the very specific thing that's being discussed here, this idea of like, I'm going to do a thing, I'm going to do it a couple of times, and I'm like a stand up, and I'm going to do one big callback at the end and like bust everybody up because you all forgot about that thing I said 45 minutes ago until now.
Mm.
Yeah, you can't always do that in a game. Generally, the interactivity and the fact that that changes how often you experience something, that might mess that up. But I don't see that as having enough of an overall effect because of all the other ways games can still get at you and be funny.
Yeah,
Mm.
and if you wanna try to do something like that, your game loop has to be within a single play session or what is purported to be a single play session, whether that is something with repetition to it, like the Stanley Parable,
Yeah.
or it is something that has more arcade-style gameplay or something to that effect versus, like, as you pointed out, that the playtime of a game is more tantamount to a TV series, and so if you have established characters or established character ideas or motifs, you can then have character moments and build on jokes whenever you want, wherever you want. Say what you will about where the Mario and Luigi games have gone, they know their characters, they know what they're trying to do with them, and they can build comedy in the battle sequences. You
Mm.
don't have to wait till they're over for it to get goofy again or to do the sort of comedy that they are trying to do.
I think we're building on like one side. There's two sides of this coin with the Yakuza series that I've been thinking about. And this
Yeah.
point about the length and familiarity and the ease of writing a weird situation for Kiryu to be in because you've already played 500 hours of games with Kiryu as the main character. So
Yeah.
if Kiryu meets the Diaper Club guys, to just give an example,
Mhm.
that's already something that I am primed to enjoy. There's another side of that where if it keeps going for too long, then those can stop working. And that is a little bit what Nico Sandman is talking about. So, Doug, if you could read what Nico Sandman wrote.
Sure. Nico Sandman writes, in my opinion, it's different and probably trickier to be a funny game than a funny movie. Comedy is built on subverting expectations, and unlike a live action movie, a video game has to build those expectations from scratch. I think one of the reasons Borderlands suffered diminishing returns on comedy is because by the time Borderlands 3 came out, they were pretty much doing what you expected them to from prior games. Tiny Tina's Wonderland was a little funnier to me because Dungeons and Dragons is something we are familiar with that they hadn't fully mined yet. Um, a movie has to build something from scratch too. You generally, unless it's
Oh,
a
yeah.
sequel, you've never met these characters before, right? So both of them have to build things from scratch. I think in terms of a video game being from scratch, you're building the mechanics, you're building the world, you're building the characters. So all of that has to come into play. But I don't know that it's necessarily trickier to um, to do this in games than it is in movies. And just like with movies, you can have diminishing returns if by the time you get to the third sequel or
Yeah.
something. I mean, there's
Austin Powers.
dude, Police Academy. I mean, the world is littered with very unfunny sequels to things.
Mhm.
But comedy in a video game sequel is almost its own separate discussion. Um, because that's the one thing, right? In a sequel, you are likely suffering from less in terms of being able to subvert people's expectations because the first movie created all the expectations. So
Right. It's
doing the same
part of
thing over.
the.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Doing the same thing over again is going to be always going to be less funny the second time
Mhm.
around.
That's the other side of that Yakuza coin, which there's a lot of this is a whole bigger conversation. We talked about this in the Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii episode for like 45 minutes if you want to go hear the whole discussion about this. But there is an element to this where like things that I think should have been funny in that game, the fact that Goro Majima is a pirate, and that's the whole premise of the game. That's a funny premise for the game,
Yeah.
but the game's not very funny, I didn't think. And I think it's just because I've been with Goro Majima for 10 games at this point, and they're not really subverting expectations anymore. I know what's coming, and it's less funny because of it. And I kind of think, like, I was specifically, when tying that to what Nico Sandman wrote, thinking about the comment about Borderlands 3. Is Borderlands 3 less funny because the jokes are worse, or is it because you played Borderlands 1 and 2 and you're just very accustomed to those jokes? Whereas when you played Borderlands 1, you hadn't really played a game like that before, with that gameplay married with that comedic style, which I think Borderlands comedy is nails on a chalkboard to me personally, but
Same.
a lot of people found those funny. Whereas you get to Borderlands 3, Borderlands 4 came out last year. I don't hear people talking about it as a funny game. Did they stop writing jokes, or have you just heard those jokes 400 times now and they're not funny anymore?
There's also those times where so a completely different medium, I suppose. I am a very big fan of the Dragon Ball Abridged series. That if you want to find jokes in that are like, you can pull them out and like, here's the joke, you look to the first third of them. Are they better jokes? Or is it better writing? I would argue no, actually. And I think the creators behind it would agree with you. But the back half of the series, I love to the moon and back, and I will watch the first half of it because it's part of it. And a lot of it comes down to the world they've built and the pace and the style that they have honed for their version. And so you have a lot of fun of setup and payoff there, subversions that they have created unto themselves, or the times that they go, no, we're playing this bit completely straight. Oh, okay. But those aren't necessarily as like, ooh, wacky joke kind of thing. But I will laugh so much harder at those later jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Where Borderlands, I think Borderlands 3 kind of suffered from Borderlands 1 had surprise to it. Borderlands 3 needed to work harder within the same playground if they didn't evolve. And I think a lot of folks felt they didn't.
Mm. Is that something like that feeling within comedy that you have to evolve from an original place of comedy that does that make it worse? Like trying harder to be funny, trying to be more funny than the first thing, like inherently, not inherently, but then makes it harder to be funny in the first place?
Well, I think it depends on what's the source of the comedy, right? Because if it's
Yes.
a joke, if you're repeating the same joke, you're always going to have diminishing returns because it'll
Mhm.
never be as funny as the first time you heard it. But think about like comedy franchises or characters that have been around for a long time, right? So again, to go back to the Muppets, right? The Muppets, they just did that special recently. Like they revived the Muppet Show, right?
Yep.
Kermit, Fozzie, Miss Piggy, they're all the same characters they've been for 50 years, right?
Mhm.
But the scenarios change. The things that they're doing changes. So like is like does Fozzie tells bad jokes, Piggy is self-centered, right? Their core like deal hasn't changed, but they're
Mhm.
Right.
recombining those things in new ways so that you are delighted by what they do rather than being bored by it. Because you can watch comedy sequels where it's like, oh, they're literally just doing the exact same bit from the last movie or whatever, and it will ring hollow because it's like, oh, I see what you're doing. You're just literally like, I'm trying to get another high off the same drug, and it's not going to get me as high. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
with regards to like Borderlands, I've not played the series, so I can't speak to why 3 is less funny than 1 to Nico Sandman. But I could very well see that, like, yeah, it's not that something has to evolve, but again, comedy is always about expectation, so something has to be different. So even if you keep all the
Mhm.
same characters, you can be the Looney Tunes or whatever, like it's all the same characters, but the stuff changes and their reaction to those things changes. So what it sounds like to me is the tone of Borderlands 3 and or the characters are just circling the same things they've already done, and that's why it
Mhm.
feels stale.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
the
makes
Muppets are
sense.
actually a great example of they are truly portrayed not as puppets, but as repertory players. You know, Kermit in The Great Muppet Caper is an actor playing his character. In Muppet Christmas Carol, he is Kermit the Frog playing Bob Cratchit, kind of thing. And thus he can be in new situations and new things can work from that. You're right. Something has to shift, something has to change, and you have adjusted the lens.
Hmm.
And games can do that, and games should do that. And I think some of it too is comedy does evolve, comedy does build, and especially if you are telling the same joke over and over, you will evolve on it. And sometimes that is for the better in general, or sometimes it does land on something very funny, but only for the people who were there for the entire journey.
Hmm.
This is something that gets talked about occasionally in terms of filming comedy, where, this was actually a Monty Python thing. They were talking about, like, they would write these great jokes, and this is before Monty Python formed, when they were just TV writers for, like, At Last, the 1942 show, stuff like that, and they would give something to Marty Feldman, and it was a very funny line, and it got the crew to laugh while they were doing it, but they had to do so many takes of it that he would do new bits, and new bits, and new bits to keep the crew laughing, but by the end, it was largely unrecognizable from what was originally written. And
Hmm.
was it still funny? Maybe, not always. And you can evolve on those bits within a game or within a longer form of entertainment period if you bring people along. And sometimes you can just iterate and iterate and iterate behind closed doors and drop it, and maybe it works. Maybe that feels like the right kind of absurd. It all depends.
Hmm.
I do have one thought that occurred to me earlier that I would like to circle back to for a
Yeah.
moment. The idea of games writers not being comedy writers,
Mm.
and that factor of how it matters and it doesn't matter. What does matter, I think, is intent on this and how much weight you give something. There is something that I've heard come up in conversations about generative AI, in the idea that anybody that works in a creative field, business field, whatever, feels like generative AI could never do what I do, but it could take care of this other stuff that I don't think as much about. But if you go into that field, those people go, generative AI could never do what I could do. There's subtleties, there's things to learn, it just steals. But the first one there, I don't know, generative AI could take care of that.
Hmm.
And even before that became a debate point, you look at anything in a creative endeavor, there's so many factors that go into it. You can't have all of them looked at with the same granularity and the same level of detail. Things have to rise to the top one way or the other or get the most time or effort. And because maybe because there is this sort of idea of, our games, can they really be funny? Should they be funny? Don't lean too hard on the comedy, otherwise the game will suck. Whatever it is, it can be a thing that falls by the wayside. Or because of the unique nature of game design, you sometimes write a funny scene or you make something funny, but then you execute it in the code and it doesn't quite work the same way. And you don't have the time to zhuzh that out the same way you do rehearsing with some actors, where you could just redo the take.
Hmm.
So I think there is sometimes a case of it is very funny, except it was funny at an earlier stage. And unfortunately, it got lost in the wash just a little bit.
Yeah. There's just more variables in games than, I this is a gross oversimplification, but like I write a joke, I hand the script to an actor, the actor memorizes the script, and then they perform it and it's filmed. And I think that there's fewer variables there than all the things that go into a finished video game product.
I would argue that there are just as many, if not more, in your example, but we have had the entirety of human existence to learn how to adjust to those, and instinctively so, versus zeros and ones.
That's also part of it too. I mean, like, both of you are probably bigger students of like the history of comedy than I am, but the history of comedy, but not just comedy, the history of film, the history of stage performance goes back way longer than the history of video games and the creation of video games. So even if there are not more variables, we have a lot more experience with those variables, perhaps.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add one more thing, is this: there's been a lot kind of bubbling up through the comments of some, like, not should there be comedy in games, but like it is more challenging. It's probably easier. Let's just go for full blown horror, right? We're never going to miss with that. We'll just make everything covered in blood and eyeballs, and it'll work. Um,
Yeah.
but comedy is part of just the human experience, and because
Yes.
of that, like comedy's been around in games since they first had the technology to do anything funny in a game. Like most of what we've been talking about is modern stuff, but like old text adventures are Zork is funny. You're right. The
Yeah, oh,
people who
yeah,
made
Zork's
that,
very funny.
yeah, the people who made that said like, they're a bunch of Monty Python nerds. Like, let's do this. Or like the cutscenes in Ms. Pac-Man, right? They're very
Mhm.
primitive, but they're charming and cute and designed to get a chuckle out of you in some ways. Like,
Yeah, we've
so
all been writing jokes in notebooks and playing with our dolls, and these are how they come out in early video games.
Mhm.
yeah, because the people who make video games are humans, and humans want to laugh. They want, this is just, it's going to be there. So I
Yeah.
think, but I agree with you, Jen, in that like this is relatively new, and the technology is constantly evolving in a way that like if you want to write a very funny book, like Charles Dickens cracked that shit,
Mm,
150 years ago.
right.
Funny movies, funny plays have been around for quite a long time now. Comedy in video games is newer, and not only is it newer, but each game, an FPS is going to let you do different things than a turn-based RPG will. So you
Yeah.
have to adjust whatever comedy you're going to do to the the particulars of that game. And so
Yeah.
like I'm excited to see what people do with this. I'm always glad to come along and play a funny game. It's certainly easy to play things that are hard and scary and action packed or whatever, but comedy is harder but much more welcome and interesting when it shows up.
So
Mhm.
rewarding.
Well, you've got stuff that you go to Resident Evil for the horror, but Resident Evil's a very funny series of games. Like those games are goofy as hell, and they'll make you laugh just as much as they might scare you, I feel like. At least in the place that Resident Evil came from. Maybe
'Cause they're
not all of
earnest.
them are the funniest things. Yeah. And, to be fair to the people who wrote in, I specifically asked them to think of ways that it might be more difficult for games to be funny. I don't think that anyone truly wrote in saying that games are not funny and here's why.
Mhm.
So this, I did lead them into like, let's talk about the challenges. And there are a bunch of different challenges that may be unique to games, but there are a bunch of unique things that games present that if you can't be funny in the same way in anything else except maybe more often in stage performance, like we've talked about a little bit. Um, we do have a couple of like miscellaneous comments that I wanted to read out because these are perhaps the mine is not as deep, but I do think that these are ways that games can be funny. I think we mentioned a long time ago, someone said the words unintentional comedy, and I think that it's funny to go back to the original Silent Hill 2 and listen to the voice acting. I think it's funny, and that's not. I don't I don't watch a TV show from the 60s and think, well, the voice performance here is funny by nature because it's like amateurish or something. Like that's
Mhm.
just not a real thing, at least not in my experience. That is a thing in some old video games. You play a game with voice acting from the mid 90s, Resident Evil 1, and that shit is funny. The voice deliveries, the Jill sandwich line, that shit's funny. So Trash Dog Actual wrote about this in Discord. Mentioned outdated voice acting, graphical limitations, weird tonal shifts, jank and glitches, which we've talked a little bit about, but like jank is funny, glitches are funny. That's half the appeal of Skyrim, I feel like, is
Yeah.
characters bugging the fuck out. Like that's funny. And then Aaron in Discord also shared a clip of NBA 2K15 voice acting, which is, if you haven't watched it, if I remember, if I'm not feeling lazy when I edit this, I'll just play a clip of some voice lines. It's terrible.
Yo, what's going on tonight? I'm running free all over the court and you didn't give me the ball.
Man, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about making sure I get my touches, yo. Move the ball, share it with your teammates. Make the extra pass so that we can get easy looks. You got it?
Boy, get out my face with that, man. I do what I do with the rock for the good of this team. And I don't need nobody second guessing me. You ain't my coach, punk.
That's the kind of selfish I'm talking about. Get over yourself, man.
Terrible. and it's funny because of how bad it is. And I think that's a uniquely game thing.
It's if you want to find that in another medium, you have to go back decades. You have to look at the earlier, like, low budget animations of the 40s and 50s, early commercials, those kinds of things where they just sort of pull people in and it's just like, here's some copy, read it. Okay, kind of thing, which half of those voice performances of the 90s in video games is. It really is just like, hey kid, get over here. You're a zombie now.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And that was something that I briefly touched on before. It's earnest.
Yeah.
If you try to intentionally make something bad, you might succeed. But the jank made by a truly earnest effort, because there are those times where it's like, isn't this all really ridiculous? Or, oh, wow, that happened. That just, it's not connecting with the material. It's standing outside of it. And if it's not engaged with the material, why should you be? I do a lot of hosting of nightlife events, burlesque shows, comedy things, stuff like that. And as a host, you do have to be funny. You do have to be entertaining. But for me, the key is you have to be the biggest fan of everybody who's about to come out on stage. If you aren't excited for them, if you're not hyping them up, why should the audience care? And so an earnest effort of, people trying their best to be voice actors or whatever thing goes wrong in a game for one reason or another, if it's the result of an earnest effort, it invites us to engage with it on that level and have fun with it.
Yeah, you're talking about sincerity, right? Like sincerity is really engaging. So like when you hear those clumsy voice performances from Symphony of the Night, like you're gonna laugh at that because like it's adorable that the dialogue is so clumsy and so poorly done. It's the reason why like The Room is fun to watch. The Room would be depressing to watch if it was not sincere, but because everyone is like trying their best and flailing wildly and it makes no sense, like we're still talking about that movie 20 years later as like the quote unquote best worst movie, right? All of the FMV stuff from the early 90s, man, like it's you couldn't
the opening to Sewer Shark lives in my heart.
I mean, I came up playing stuff like The Seventh Guest, like, like all of these really like awkward voice performances or, highly pixelated FMV things. The budget just wasn't there. And the desire wasn't, people didn't realize like right now, like, if you want to call up a famous person and get them into your video game, you can do it. That couldn't happen in 1991. It just wasn't going to. Even
those weren't even Tim Curry days.
No, yeah, exactly. Before he was sending us to space. Like getting an actor like that into a game was like a big deal. And again, this is like a C-level person they could get and be like, look who's in our game. Mark Hamill slumming it.
Right.
Instead of we got I don't know, Idris Elba to voice this character. So
right.
It's a fun era. And I think because everyone was trying their best, like that is good unintentional comedy because their hearts are in the right place. Like they're doing their best.
Yeah. You can laugh at everyone else's high school theater videos, but you could never watch your own because you lived it kind of thing. And this is kind of bits and pieces of what we're seeing with those efforts.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, along the same lines, like if in The Witcher 3, they had built a joke where Roach ends up on the top of a building, it wouldn't be as funny as when Roach glitches out and ends up on top of a building, which does happen from time to time in that game. And that kind of weirdness, but like they're not trying too hard to make a thing here. It's just this weird thing that happened becomes funny.
And you sometimes lean in. Again, putting a bucket on someone's head in Skyrim allows you to steal from them. If they designed it intentionally like that, I don't know if it'd be nearly as funny as they just went, well, we're not changing it.
Yeah, right. We do have another comment here, which I think is a nice thing to kind of lead us into the ending here. It comes from Petra Cora, who says, sometimes I laugh out loud because of something the game designer put into the game where I can see the game designer behind it. Let it be some cleverly hidden puzzle solution, environmental storytelling, or anything else. I feel some kind of connection, and as if the person behind the game just told me a joke directly, feeling a sense of, I see what you did there, which I think that you can make that connection with any type of medium to a certain extent. But to me, to get real zoomed out, part of the reason I love video games is the fact that I am a participant in the game more so than anything else. Again, other than maybe me acting in a stage play, I am a part of the experience of the game. I'm a part of the art. I'm the missing piece. The game developer made everything except for me, and then I complete the thing when I start playing it. I'm a part of it. And I think that lets you make that connection, that feeling of like, I see what you did there, game developer, that Petricora is talking about, that I feel that more strongly in games. And so like if someone creates that situation, like that Elden Ring pit with or that trap with the pressure plates, I think that's part of what makes that funny is I'm like, I can visualize the person who was like, what would be funny right here is if we built this pressure plate trap with this 3-part thing. I think that this is a really astute observation. And I think that a lot of people who love games feel more a part of it and thus more connected to the people who made it.
Yeah. I think, honestly, this is a key thing in a lot of art. The last step in the creation of any art is the interaction of the viewer. And games allow us to more viscerally take part in that. And I mean, art can still be complete without an audience if the audience is just the artist. But games, my favorite games, do allow for curated vision like that. Or those moments where, sometimes a joke is just for me. Or the ways that, you see the person behind it. You start to get a sense of style. You start to get a sense of whatever the case may be. And you get the joy of discovery. There's so much of watching MCU movies or cartoons or things like that where you can catch Easter eggs and things in the background and you could really watch out for stuff and like, oh, what did they really write down on that notebook in that one little frame? And you can have fun searching for that. Games allow you to participate in that wholeheartedly. And that opportunity of additional investment, of building up your own sense of tension that can then be released by finding a solution, finding essentially a whoopee cushion, or anything else. Yeah, that environment and that communication that is across time, that is, hey, I left this for you. Feels really good.
Yeah, there's also an intimacy there because when you think about how comedy normally works, usually the bigger the audience, the better. Seeing a comedy in a full movie theater, you can get those like, there's something electric about belly laughs that are kind of just shared across the audience. Or, go to a comedy club where there's like 3 people watching the comic. The jokes are going to be the same jokes, but they don't land the same way as when the club is full. But video games are the opposite, right? Because by and large, yes, there is a large audience, right? However many million people bought this thing, but they're all playing it generally in their own bedrooms or living rooms by themselves, right? So even though there's a large audience, generally there's this perception of like, it's just you, developer, and me. You made this world for me to experience because I'm not really sharing the experience of the other people who are playing the game at the same time as me. And even then, their instances won't be the same as mine. And so when you come across something like that and you can really see, have that I see what you did there moment, it does feel like, oh, this is not a comedian standing at a microphone talking to a crowd. This is like my mom sitting on the edge of my bed telling me a story. This story is just for me to enjoy today. And because of that, that creates an opportunity for a different kind of experience.
Yeah. At its biggest, it's basically, you and the dungeon master kind of thing. It is still conversation and back and forth, but you're right. It's so much more intimate.
Yeah. I think of every time that I've ever, taken a turn off of the main path in a dungeon, in a game, and like gone into this corner. And I don't know, maybe there's a cupboard there and I open the cupboard and there's a joke item inside. And like someone made the decision to put a joke item in there because someone like me might go off the main path and go be like, I wonder what's in there. And they put a little treat in there for me. And that's what Petricora is talking about. And I totally agree with that. I'm trying to think of like hard examples of that, but like take the modern Fallouts. I think they do this really well. The Elder Scrolls games do that kind of thing really well. So it doesn't always have to be a joke, but like sometimes it is. But regardless of whether it's a joke or not, it's that connection between the person who decided to put that there and then you on the other side of it. It's almost like they're one-to-one telling you a joke or giving you a reward or something like that.
I would say the closest off the top of my head that does this writ large is the Stanley Parable.
Yeah. Every weird idea that you have to challenge the narrator in the Stanley Parable, there's something waiting for you when you do that.
He's already waiting for Stanley.
Yeah.
Stanley thinks he's very smart, but
Yeah,
we're smarter.
exactly.
Exactly.
So I think that we could go on for another 2 hours talking about this, but
That wouldn't be very funny.
it would be very funny.
Okay.
How dare
Maybe
you?
diminishing returns, as long as we switch it up, I think we'll be okay if we've learned anything. But I think we could go on for a while, but I do want to turn it over to the both of you. If you have any kind of wrap up thoughts about comedy in games and the special ways, maybe the ways that games do it the best from your perspective. Because we started with, of course, the ridiculous question, is it harder for games to be funny? And the answer is like, in one very specific way, maybe, but in 100 other ways, no, it's actually easier and better.
Yeah.
So any wrap up thoughts?
Yeah. Doug touched on something earlier of there are ample opportunities to bake your comedy into the menu, into the tutorial, into whatever it is you're doing. And that is true about game design in general. Game design, from the moment you turn the game on, you are actively participating in the game. And there are ways that you can teach, interact, entertain, and challenge from the word go.
Mm-hmm.
Comedy is no different, and it is all about thinking through the game with your comedy. That makes it easier or harder.
Yeah, you mentioned the concept of like treats, and games in a large part are about treats. These little dopamine hits you get for
Yeah.
doing a good job in the game, and usually that is overcoming enemies and obstacles and things like that. But humor can be this extra layer of joy you can put into a game, whether it is through the combat or exploration or simply just reading things in the environment. There's always a way to hang a joke on something. And
Mhm.
so, I think, as you said, Jen, like games are really about intentionality in their design. And
Yeah.
so anytime you put something in to any creative work, the question that the creator should be asking is, why did I put this in there? Why does this enhance the thing? So when it comes to humor, I would just say, like, not every game has to be funny. It certainly doesn't have to be funny all the time. Each one is a different creative work with a different creative objective. But if you're going to put in comedy into a game, like, you do have many opportunities and many vectors that you can come at it for comedy. So I think, again,
Yeah.
this is something to really look forward to in a game. I'm always hoping it's going to surprise me in a funny way, no matter how dark the subject matter is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here.
That's my big takeaway too, is that games are so complicated with so many moving parts and so many different elements that are part of your interactive experience. But like Doug said, all of those moving parts are potential ways to be funny if that's your goal. And there are certain games like The Last of Us that will go for that more traditional cinematic type of this is a cutscene you're watching, and Ellie is going to cut through the tension with a joke about a porno mag here. And that's funny. But not every game has to do that type of thing. There's so many different ways that games can be funny. So we knew this going into the conversation, but as always, it's been a really good time really diving in and exploring all these nooks and crannies of comedy in games. And like I said, we've got a bunch of stuff that I'm sure that we could talk about that we're not going to get to in this episode. So if anyone would like to continue the conversation in the Discord server, that's a great place to do that. Come in and chat about it. There were comments from people in Discord that I didn't get a chance to include in the episode. So apologies to you if I didn't include yours. But yeah, join the conversation. Let's keep it going. And before we go, I do want to give Jen and Doug a chance to talk about the work that they do, which often includes comedy as well. So, Jen, I'll throw it to you first. Tell the people about the Fun and Games podcast and any other work that you want to shout out.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, Dave, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of
course.
fun. I like taking silly things very seriously, and that ties in very nicely to Fun and Games Podcast, a
Yeah.
podcast that I produce with Matt Storm, where we are an interview and discussion podcast about gaming as a medium, as a culture, and with a focus on indie games and an optimistic view. The idea that there are a lot of games out there. No one can play every game, but every game could be somebody's favorite. Any comedic moment could be somebody's favorite thing. And you might not even think it was meant to be funny, but someone's laughing anyway. And we like to showcase those kinds of things, discuss that, and shine lights on maybe something that you might have missed or just enjoying the love of gaming. We also have a side series called Side Quests that have a different host every episode talking about a video game they love and why they love it. I've personally discovered a lot of games that are now in my collection and have been a big drain on my bank account, but they are all joys because somebody did a side quest about them. I wouldn't have heard of them otherwise. So we're very much about conversation, and that's what's out there. You can find us at Fun and Games Pod wherever you are checking social media. We are on every podcast platform that we can think of. And if you're looking for anything that I'm up to, genmoonen.com is my website, and you can find me on social media at Noise Generator with a silent G at the beginning.
I love that. That joke makes me laugh every time, even if it's not a joke. Yeah, good stuff. And, if you enjoy topic discussions like the episode that we've just done that we're nearing the end of, Fun and Games has a lot of topic discussions about one very specific side or angle of video games. So good stuff.
Matt and I like to get in there. Yeah, thank you.
Love it. And Doug, as I said at the top, you've got 3 podcasts, I think, that you're currently working on. So please tell the people about those.
I do. So the flagship show is Nostalgium Arcanum. I know that name is a joke in of itself because it's impossible to spell or remember, but thankfully Dave will put a link to it. I hope in the show notes.
I will, yeah.
Yeah,
Dave, fun in quotes. Think of the SEO. It's stupid, but I did it.
So that's as the name suggests, it's a nostalgia show. It's a pop culture retrospective where the guest or guests come on to talk about a thing that they are still obsessed with decades later. Dave was on the show recently talking about Rocky. So the laugh a minute movie. But we do plenty of comedy stuff as well, and games and music and TV shows, comedians, whatever the guest wants to talk about, we'll do. And then there's the show Playing by Ear, which is a podcast I do with my wife and brother-in-law, where every episode we take a different album and just go through it track by track and talk about what works, what doesn't work, and score it. And then the last one is Still Muppeting, which I do with Josh Koval over at the Still Loading podcast. So you go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod to listen to us talk about the Muppets once a month. And I think since this is coming out in April, I believe the episode is on Muppet Babies. That's the most recent one. So there you go.
Yeah. And of course, obviously, if you're into comedy, the Muppets, that's about as classic as we get. And then I remember some Nostalgia Arcanum episodes that made me, when I was thinking of who to have on the episode, I was like, I should get Doug because, for example, I really loved your episode about George Carlin, one of my favorite comedians. And I think, was that with Case Aiken?
No, it was my friend Rich Baker. We did George Carlin. We also did one on Mitch Hedberg a while back, and we're
Mitch Hedberg too.
Yeah, nice. And I think, assuming this gets recorded and the universe works out, there should be an episode on the horizon very soon about Steve Martin. So,
fantastic,
nice.
And not to leave Case out, hanging out to dry, the episode about Calvin and Hobbes was also very good with Case. And there's good comedy in Calvin and Hobbes. So
amazing.
There we go. Lots of good stuff to check out there between Fun and Games, Nostalgia Arcanum, Playing by Ear, and Still Muppeting. Lots of good stuff. Links down in the show notes as always. And I did my plugs at the top of the show. And a reminder, the Discord server is open to the public. It's free. Come on in, hang out with us if you would like. And that is all. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Jen, for being here. This has been a wonderful conversation, as I knew it would be.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. That was great.
Of course. And that is all that's left to say is if you're still here with us at the end of the show, you are my hero. And tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog. All right, folks, thanks for listening to the discussion about comedy and video games. And before we go, I'd like to give a quick announcement about a guest appearance I did and do the customary thank yous. You can catch me on Play Along Podcast for their Get Wrecked series, where me and one of the hosts, Ben, recommended a game to each other. We both played and discussed. Those two games in the episode are Devotion and Superliminal. So check out Play Along Podcast for that episode. I'll put a link down in the show notes for that. And as always, I'd like to say thank you to the patrons who help support the show. A big thank you goes out to Chris Nelson, Zulgeek, Chris Copleen, Rick Firestone, Nick Vicori, Soccer, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Lief, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Jenny E., Marcus O'Neill, Stefan, Drellish, Rigamort, Silcanet, Levi, John E., Aliasi, Joseph Hooper, Aaron, Squill, Alan Kress, Doug T., Retro Overdrive, One of Many Tots, Magic Crow, Curly Bright, Ian L., Steve Yeager, Trash Dog Actual, Matthew Maloney, Delaney and Jack McBride, Ethan Young, Michael Lassen, Michael Matuzak, Keith B., Brian Wagers, and many more. Thank you all for your support. It really means a lot to me, and it helps out in a lot of different ways. And if anyone out there would like to join them, you can start by going to patreon.com/realdavejackson, checking out the tiers and the associated bonuses, and I thank you for considering that. That's the end for this episode. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone?
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
Welcome to Bits of Time, where we ask you the simple question, is this video game worth your time? And we're two brothers having a conversation about a game and why we loved it.
Or a difficult discussion about why I didn't or we didn't beat a game. So I hope you join us.
Because it gets pretty wacky sometimes with the questions we ask each other, and maybe a little heated every once in a while too. If you plan on sticking around, you'll be getting 2 episodes each month, the first and third Wednesday.
We also have a brand new debate-focused series, so if you want to be a part of it, join us.
Yeah, join us. Or, reach out, get in contact with us, and maybe you could be on the show with us and debating all kinds of things, granular or not. We'll see you then.